Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we'll explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who have found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. Welcome back, everyone. I'm very excited about this week's episode. We're going to take a little bit of a different direction. And this week's episode is going to be a little bit of a reintroduction and a celebration. Last week, we already started season 2 and our second year of the podcast with Arlesia. So we've already had our first interview of season 2. But what we haven't done is an official kind of relaunch, re-kickoff, reintroduction, and celebration for season 2 and of the guests in season 1. So that's what this week is all about. So I'm a week behind, but hey, we roll with the flow. So this week, we have a lot of new listeners, and in case they haven't yet had an opportunity to go back and listen to episode 1, where we really talk about the what and the why and the how of this podcast, I'm going to touch on those things a little bit and invite and encourage you to go back to episode 1 and listen to that. That's really the whole kind of origin story of Off the Comma. There's a lot to hear there. Also, talk a little bit about what we're doing and kind of where we're at with the podcast. And then I also want to spend some time celebrating all of our guests from season 1. There were about 25 of you that we've interviewed so far. And I have a little surprise for everybody who's listening to kind of to actually have that celebration. So not the best words, but anyway, so Off the Comma, the podcast. So for those of you who are new here, I'm Paul Briley. I am, I describe myself really as an explorer, someone who I love exploring the world around me, whether it's the neighborhood and the city I live in, whether it's other states in the country that I live in, or some of my newfound joy of traveling internationally and just really learning more about humans and human history and geography around the world. I'm also an organizer. That's kind of what I do. Everything that I do in my life involves some degree of organizing, sorting, putting things in order. And I also do that for fun sometimes as sort of like side work. But it's also a big part of everything that I do in my mainstream occupations. And a new label that I'm using because it started showing up in my life is this term alchemist. And I know some of you may be familiar with books that have been written. There's definitely a book called The Alchemist. I just read that recently, this term that's used in the context of personal and personality style assessments and so forth. But an alchemist is someone who converts things or transforms things. And I see that as being a true theme throughout my life of being able to, I think it's tied to my organizing theme here and my exploring theme. It's like being able to observe and listen and notice and explore and be able to take these things and somehow rearrange and organize them and then transform them and present them back in a way that creates something new. So there's so much more we could go with that, but that's a new label that I'm using, alchemist, and kind of exploring that part of me as well. So I am a consultant in life. I do consulting work with training and development, which involves workshops and teaching and designing training programs for groups and organizations and companies. But I'm also a life coach. I have been doing some degree of coaching throughout my career in the organizational context, and just recently, 2021, completed my professional coach training to be a life coach, and then also completed my International Coaching Federation certification in 2022, and started my own practice. So I've actually been a practicing life coach for a couple of years now. Very early on in the process, and in conjunction with working with clients one-on-one and in group and in workshop settings, there's also this podcast. Now, The podcast isn't a job. This is a passion project for me. So you may have noticed, those of you who've been listening, those of you who are new here, this is important. This is not a platform for advertising and promotion and celebrities and advice giving. This podcast is all about creating a space for everyday people like ourselves to tell their stories. It's a forum for sharing stories about what it's like to sit on a comma, being stuck, to put it shortly. People talking about what it's like to be stuck and get unstuck. And so we do storytelling here. And the goal and the intention of this storytelling is that rather than bring people who have advice and expertise and tell us what to do, not that those podcasts aren't great, and I listen to a lot of them, but this place is where we celebrate the wisdom that we have within ourselves. And so what we want to do here is to give people an opportunity to talk about their stories, to share their experiences, to share what happened to them and with them and for them during these experiences. And I ask questions along the way to kind of unpack it and dig a little deeper. But the goal here is that we see ourselves in each other's stories. And so in listening to someone else's story, they don't have to tell you how to live your life or how to get unstuck or how to solve a problem. But in listening to other people's stories, you will hear things that reflect back parts of yourself. You will hear things that spark your own deep inner knowing and your own inner wisdom. You will hear things that you greatly resonate with and that really strike a chord for you. And so the hope here is that in listening to the stories of others, you hear things that you can connect with, you hear things that inspire you. It helps you feel not quite so alone, a little bit more connected. And then in the best case, that you feel empowered and emboldened to actually take an action that maybe you've been putting off or been thinking about or contemplating, and now you're ready to do something with. And so that's what we do here. And we have had the honor and the privilege over the past year, not quite a year, but in year one, I should say, of talking to and hearing the stories from these 25 amazing people. And so what I'm going to do today is celebrate those folks and our first year by playing for you a montage. In each episode, I ask the same 5 questions of every guest, and it's the same 5 questions, but their answers are all unique. And it's their answers to these questions that make each episode different and unique and powerful. And so each episode is like its own fingerprint, if you will. And so what I've done so far, and we're going to do more with this, is working with my producer, Sonny. He's gone in and he's taken the answers to question 1 from each of the guests. So in just a second, we're going to play for you this montage, and it's everybody's answers to the first question of the podcast, which is, where do you find yourself sitting on a comma in life? So get ready, and starting with Austin and finishing with Arlesia, let's hear what everybody has said so far when asked the question, where do you find yourself sitting on a comma? Where have you found yourself sitting on a comma in your life?
A comma that I'm currently stuck on right now is creating my personal and professional brand to share with the world. So in other words, I'm really embracing becoming a public figure and sharing my true identity and self with others.
My comma was just coasting, and I knew I wanted change.
I've recently just gotten married. I was spending a lot of energy on that in the last year and a half. And it sort of left me with this feeling of like, okay, well, now what?
I was going through the separation with my kid's mom and really realizing like I didn't have a mission or a purpose.
I have written 3 complete books that happen to be sitting on the shelf beside me, but they have never gone beyond my safe space. They have value, I believe, and I've found every reason to not share them, to not publish them, to just let them sit and stagnate.
I had pinned all of my hope and dreams on this person. It was a very unhealthy choice to begin with because I sort of dived into it. I seem to have done this for most of my adult life. I spiral into these relationships. I go all in, guns blazing. Everything else goes by the wayside, and I make this person, you know, the top priority, this relationship the top priority.
In 2017, I was a people pleaser. I was anxiously attached to a man in my life. I was a single mother with 2 kids who were teenagers, entering kind of the worst part of the teen years, which is when they start flexing their independence and they start sort of telling you that they have their own thoughts. So I'm on this precipice, and my mother was not doing well physically.
My relationship and my orientation towards purpose, reshaping, unlearning, relearning what is truly my purpose versus what was I conditioned to believe? What was I conditioned to want?
My business was in a position, as a lot of businesses were, when the first global crisis occurred. The business that I was in, went from having 12 employees and, a good revenue stream to almost falling off the edge of a cliff. It was the first time I'd really experienced that sort of, well, do I make people redundant? And do these people that mean a lot to me because they've worked with me for many years, what's right for them? But I sat around for too long, worried about the people that were working for me, rather than thinking pragmatically about the way forward and the way out of that situation.
I've come to realize that as I used to teach within the confines of a school, I realized looking back, why did it take me 20 years to leave some fairly difficult situations? It just took me that long to think that I had enough value to pursue a career that would bring me more respect rather than just service. Somebody said, hey, Erin, I teach college. How did you do it? How did you get out of it? And not that it's something we all want to leave, but how did you create your own business and write your book and all that jazz? And I found myself saying, well, it's easy to take a risk when you're used to making no money and getting no respect. And I thought, wait a minute, why did I do something for 20 years where I put myself in that position?
Every writer or anyone who's familiar with a writer knows that people can get stuck in writing. So they call it writer's block. I found that in songwriting, the inability to express myself usually means that at some point I'm not being clear with myself internally about where I am, or there's some kind of blockage that's preventing myself from being able to identify with myself. And I think that is reflected in what's going on in my life at that time.
Comparing myself to other people and being afraid or worrying about how people will perceive me or what they think of me. There was a point in my life in my 20s and early 30s where I look around and in my mind, everybody else has passion and things they really love doing. And I was over here feeling like I have nothing and having a really difficult time identifying that.
Well, I found myself at age 80 sitting on a comma. So I had, as I said, I was a retired elder law and estate planning attorney. I had been a fitness instructor for a long time. I was a co-author of a book, a good selling book, and I felt like I already had made a difference in the world. But I wondered now at 80, what could I do to make a difference?
What came through my mind was who am I? I was thinking about this morning about being on this podcast, and I was thinking about that. The two phrases that came in my head were, who am I? And I am not that person. I think what that comma was is needing to be able to step into who would be that person in that moment. First off, my trainer, the woman who trained me, trainers I had seen, people I looked up to, every teacher I ever had in my life, the great coaches that I know. I imagined this big, how do I even say it? This huger than life, glowing human that was very out of reach for me. Number one. Number two, it does come back a little bit to the cockiness. How full of myself would I need to be to say, oh, I can train people to be coaches?
Ever since I was a little boy, I wanted to be a veterinarian, kind of jumping from feline medicine to livestock to horses to this to that. But I got into Davis for animal science and, super excited, looking forward to getting into it. And my very first day of orientation, we were all 300-400 of us sitting in one of the big auditoriums for Davis. all bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, all animal science majors, and the host, whoever was doing the MC, was kind of hyping us up for a second. You guys are the best of the best. Like, not many people get into Davis, especially for animal science. One of the hardest majors to get into, making us feel good about ourselves. Then she goes, all right, if you want to be a veterinarian, raise your hand. So, all except for 4 or 5 of us raise our hand. And she said, all right, put your hands down. Advisors, raise your hand. And I think 12 of them were advisors or student advisors. So they raised their hands. So 10 out of 300. And they said, cool, just so you guys know, to set expectations, statistically speaking, that's how many of you will actually get into vet school. And you kind of just felt the energy in the room shifts.
The point of a comma for me has been the writing of the book that I have drafted part of it, but the title of the book is The 5 Vital Signs of Healthy Organizations and How to Operationalize Them. I'm sitting on the metaphorical comma in moving that forward in the writing process and in the publishing process.
I found myself in a really big bind when I was in college. At one point, I had gone through some sort of financial verification, right? So you need to use your parents' information in order for you to receive a Pell Grant or any type of other FAFSA, right? So I was told through verification that I didn't qualify anymore. And what that meant to me was, how am I supposed to continue to get my degree?
My debut EP that I released earlier this year in 2023, in the spring of 2023, was called Show Up. When I think about that album and I think about the process of bringing any art to life, I think about the many challenges, the many, I don't want to call them problems, but opportunities to make your way through seeing things in a new way. And the unexpected things that come up whenever you are striving towards anything in life, but particularly for me with that album, it was, okay, here's the recording dates. Okay, here's what I want to do to get the album out. Okay, here's the music. Okay, now I want to get it out into the world. And so many things come up along the way. So many things came up for me that I wasn't expecting. And at this point in the creative process, I've been a part of many different collaborations and worked on my own music in different contexts. It's to be expected that there will be unexpected things.
I was moving and I was doing the things and, working and staying busy, but I wasn't going forward anymore. I didn't know where was I going to? So I'm on like a treadmill or a hamster wheel or a stationary bicycle or something. So for me, it's a little less like sitting on a comma. It's more like, wait a minute, I'm still putting out a lot of energy, but I don't know where I want that energy to go. And I don't feel like I can see beyond today.
Back in 2017, I began to get a little bit of antsy about staying in corporate America. I had been in it for close to 25 years. And I just couldn't see myself just staying there until I retired and then retiring and not having any idea of what it is I wanted to do. And so I began to ask myself a lot of questions about what do you want to do in this second part of your life, in this second act?
So imagine me leaving Nigeria, showing up in Scotland for the first time, not knowing what the culture is, the temperature, the culture, the people, just throwing myself into that deep side of the ocean without knowing how to swim or knowing anything about life jacket.
I was with the state of California for 13 years and had some wonderful teammates and some wonderful team compositions and have kind of facilitated session in talking about, failure. And I still remember specifically one of my team members was like, TS isn't going to get anything out of this conversation because he's never experienced failure in his entire life. And it's like, well, darn. And then I kind of resolutely was like, okay, over the next 6 months, I'm going to try and tackle some things and, let's see if I can quote unquote fail.
There've been so many multiple commas. There've been road traffic accidents. There've been moments of nearly dying, giving birth to my son 18 years ago. There've been emotional, psychological, domestic abuse. There've been so many commas, and with things like the road traffic accident, there's mental pain and physical pain, and many angles to that sort of thing. Mental health strain and having panic attacks, and the reason behind those panic attacks, because there is always a reason behind different mental health struggles.
The majority of my life I thought I was going to be a doctor, and that was a very large comma, but I didn't realize it was a comma until college. Very education focused, and it was all about kind of those pillars like law, education, etc. I was passionate about medicine, but I think it took me kind of exploring music and medicine in school and realizing that I performed, but my passion came out a lot more when I was in creative environments.
Wow. Listening to those responses over again, first of all, brings back so many memories for me. And what struck me is just how different each of those answers are. Look at all of the different ways that people can experience sitting on a comma. Just such powerful and vulnerable and unique responses that set the stage for the stories that unfold in each of the episodes. So here's my challenge to you. What did you hear? What resonated with you? Where did you see yourself in these examples? So you probably already have those answers, but if not, replay that part and give yourself an opportunity to kind of reflect on what you're hearing and see what shows up for you. The thing that I really want to acknowledge is that for each of these guests in sharing these stories, they were really opening themselves up to vulnerability and to openness. And a number of these guests really along the way admitted to the fact that in sharing the story, it was a form of unburdening. That's my word, not theirs, of telling the story wasn't just about inspiring others, but it did something for these guests in being able to get it out there in the open and talk about it and acknowledge it. And in quite a number of cases, there were new insights and new discoveries in retelling the tale. So it's just really powerful. Just the power of story, the power of talking, the power of listening. So my call to action for you is, where are you sitting on a comma, and what do you feel called to do about it? So that's something that we unpack here. And by saying that, then here's also a plug. We are always looking for more guests. What I love about this podcast is that I'm not tied to specific timelines or holidays or events or things that are happening in the world. These stories are timeless. So I can record at any time and air at any time. And since everybody has an experience with sitting on a comma, anybody's a guest, so a guest candidate. So if you think you have a story that you'd be interested in sharing and being a guest here on the podcast, then reach out to me. My contact information is in the show notes, and let's talk about it. I have some info I can share with you, and we can see if this is a right fit for you. Also, I encourage and invite all of you. Let's grow this. This work is so important. I'm not interested in promotions and sponsors and big deals and turning this into a big kind of marketing and money making gig. I want this to be a safe space for people to share and learn from each other. So I invite and ask all of you to go to all three of the platforms where the show is airing, Apple, Spotify, and my own YouTube, and follow each of those channels, listen each week, like the episodes, comment, whatever comes to you, and share these episodes with people that you know and that you care about. And let's let this ripple outward. Let's let these good vibes and this positive space of supporting each other and lifting each other up spread. And, if you're inspired by what you hear on the podcast and you want to treat somebody else a little differently or take a different approach with them, do it. This is all about helping everybody grow and helping us all awaken together. You can also follow Off the Comma on Instagram and TikTok. And that's where we post about the podcast on a regular basis, in addition to some other things. And again, you can find me and information about the podcast on my website at offthecomma.com. And I'm on social media at Off the Comma, LinkedIn, and also have some personal accounts. It's all available through my link tree, which you can find through my website. So with that, we are at an end of episode 27 here. And I want to end in the same way that I invite all of my guests to finish each of their episodes, and that is with acknowledgments. Because I also believe in the power of lifting up others and giving voice to other creators and people who are important in our lives. And so generally the invitation is, is there a creator, organization, cause, someone else that you would like to, give credit to or give voice to and plug here on the podcast. And so the two folks that I want to acknowledge today are Sonny Etchell, who is our producer for the podcast. And I'm here in California. He's over in the greater London area. And so he helps the podcast move forward in all of its technical aspects, editing and pre and post production and setting up the posts and making sure it airs properly and that sort of thing. And so Sonny's been a lifesaver since the beginning and is growing his own business as well. So in the show notes, you'll be able to find his contact information where you can look him up. And if you're thinking about starting a podcast, then I encourage you to reach out to Sonny. And very excited to have been and continue working with him on this podcast. And also Amina Mwangozi, who I am working with. Not only has she been a guest on the podcast, but I'm also working with her on creative ideas and concepts and moving the social media side of things forward a little bit. Just more so to expand our outreach and also helping me get off of one of my own commas when it comes to getting information about me and what I do out there in the world. So started working with Amina recently and looking forward to working with her more this year on all things social media and creative. And so with that, I bid you farewell to yet another episode. I hope you enjoyed the montage and the celebration of all of our past guests. And looking forward to this next year ahead with even more guests, even more stories and more inspiration and acknowledgement and celebration. So have a wonderful week and a wonderful 2024 ahead. And I hope to see you not only in the audience, but potentially behind your own microphone as well. I invite you to think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. I can't tell you how magical it can be to set aside your expectations and just let your thoughts flow out of your head and onto paper. You don't have to have an agenda. You don't have to do anything with it, but you can be amazed at what comes out of your thoughts and onto paper and what that can do for you. I know freestyle journaling has been a powerful practice in my life for a very long time. You just never know what you might discover about yourself. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. Follow me on social media at Off the Comma, and also look for upcoming workshops and events at offthecomma.com, or better yet, go to offthecomma.com and sign up for my mailing list and let me bring the news directly to you. I am passionate about keeping this podcast ad-free so that we create a safe container for people to be able to tell their stories uninterrupted by commercials and promotions. I currently cover all the production costs, and I'm happy to continue doing so. And I'm also open to and appreciative of any donations that anyone would like to contribute. This is nothing more than to be able to support the podcast and cover some of the monthly editing and producing and equipment costs that are associated with this podcast. So look for the donations link in the podcast descriptions wherever you find this podcast. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast, and more importantly, spread the good word. If you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. As always, keep noticing.